Can I ask for the show of hands, who's here at St Ethelburga's today for the first time? Oh, quite a few people. Okay, a very special warm welcome to you. So just to let you know, this ground, here we're sitting, has been consecrated as sacred ground for at least 800 years, because that's where we have the first historical record of a church building on this site. So for 800 years, at least 800 years, maybe longer, people have been gathering here to remember what's most sacred. Then, on April 24th, 1993, at 10:27 in the morning, which is maybe just about now, actually, an IRA bomb detonated across the street, and it flattened the church. It killed one person, it injured many more. It sent up a mushroom cloud of rubble and ash that was visible to a 30-kilometer radius all around. It created a 15-foot crater here in the street, and it shattered 500 tons of glass. So, just for a second, I'd like everyone to please lift up those shard-shaped pieces of glass, paper. Thank you. So if you can imagine that all the way from Liverpool Street in the north to Threadneedle Street in the south, for those moments following the detonation, there was nothing but this shattering. Thank you. Obviously, the original stained glass window that was in the building shattered, along with all of the glass from all of the skyscrapers around. Some of those fragments made their way ultimately into the cloak. Here you can see St Ethelburga's multicolored cloak, which contains fragments from the original stained glass window and also from some of the skyscrapers. But sometimes I think about the people whose job it was to come onto this crime scene and to sift through the rubble and the ashes and to pick up these broken fragments. And I imagine what that would have felt like. I imagine that some of those people whose job it was to recover this historic archaeological material would have felt very optimistic. They might have felt, well, there's a purpose to saving these things. They might have felt very optimistic that a restoration was possible. At the time, it wasn't at all obvious because the site was not insured. And some other people sifting amongst the rubble, handling these broken shards, might have felt despair. They might have felt that this work was kind of futile. At that point, the Good Friday Agreement was still 6 years in the future. They might have felt desolate. I wanted to just share this image because I think it could be a useful metaphor for how we walk into some of the conversations that we're going to be having today. That there's something about the sensitivity and quality of trust in handling what's maybe broken and may not be able to be repaired. That we do this together in community with a sense that there's a shared purpose in doing that. Ultimately, the Bishop of London at the time, Bishop Richard Chartres, stood in the ashes and he prayed and he had a vision for a building that was restored not as another church, but as a center for reconciliation and peace. And as you'll see, this space tells a particular kind of story about what it means to live in the aftermath of disruption. It's a story that isn't naive, that retains what's broken, keeps it legible and remembers it, and creates a space for a new possibility beyond that. We have another space that's also designed to invite conversation and reflection about bridging divides, and that's our better intent. This was designed by Keith Critchlow, who is a renowned expert in sacred geometry, and in your little notebooks you've got some of his original architectural drawings and some of his reflections about his intentions behind the design. But it has this beautiful stained glass windows with suns and moons and trees, and a really deep intention to create a space bridging divides not only between those within the human family who may be in conflict with one another, not only between people from different faith traditions, bridging divides which be the inner and the outer, which are human and divine, and between human beings and creation. So when we at St Ethelburga is talking about bridging divides, all of these dimensions of bridging divides that we think about. Since its founding, St Ethelburga has run many programs on peace and conflict, and in more recent years, our focus has been very much on bridging divides, loving Earth, leading into the intersection between climate and peace. And we run a range of programs that look at the intersection between these issues. We run a faith-based leadership training program called Journey of Hope. We run a world music program, conflict coaching. We run a program called Lifelines, which takes different community groups out to plant hedgerows across tracts of English farmland. And if you're curious to find out more about our programs, they have a link to this brochure, which you'll find around the building. So why do we think that this is the most urgent conversation that we need to have right now? So there's a really striking research finding in a recent IEP report that found that communities with low positive peace, so not a great deal of conflict resilience, suffered 13 times more deaths following major catastrophes than communities that had high positive peace. And I think it's a really striking research finding that points to the fact that in an age of climate risk, peace is a survival skill. How climate and conflict are going to interact in the coming years is unpredictable, but that climate breakdown is going to be a major driver of conflict is undeniable. And we see a huge need to bring together those in the conflict and peace center with those in the environment sector to understand where their agendas overlap. And we're really looking forward to having some of those conversations today. At the sort of macro level, we face complex pan-national crises like climate and biodiversity, issues to do with geopolitical security, risks associated with AI. The list of existential risks that we face collectively goes on and on. And these are all global problems that require collective collaboration at scale. And then at the other end of the scale, at the micro scale, at the community level, we're seeing polarization and division and a kind of epidemic of echo chambering, very much driven by the digital revolution and AI-driven media and communications. And these tendencies and trends are only going to increase in the years to come. So at St. Ethelburga, we really feel it's never been more urgent to grow relational capacity. So today, throughout the program, we're going to see a lot of different pictures, a lot of different models of what bridging divides and loving Earth can look like. I think everyone who's speaking on the platform brings a particular angle and a particular lens to that. And so I always think of it as a kind of menu of options that you can look at. And I also think that today we're going to be hopefully doing both of these things. We're going to be doing a bit of bridging divides and loving Earth. And bridging divides can sound really nice, but it can often feel actually quite uncomfortable, because a lot of it has to do with growing resilience for conflict and disagreement. So we've got a few suggested practices that can help with this. So the first one is really just a set of gratitudes that I'd like to suggest that we hold. That one is curiosity, the presumption of good faith, acceptance of differences, and honesty. There's lots of lovely little conversation prompts on all the tables here. Please do use them to strike up conversations with people you might not have met before. We have a comments wall out here. We invite you to use your shards and there's more out here to write your comments and reflections. And I particularly warmly encourage you to name on the comments wall anything that feels unspoken or unsaid in the room. We also have some lovely roving facilitators from the St Ethelburga's team. I ask our roving facilitators to just give a wave. I've got Tarot and Harriet and Becca and Harriet here at the back. If at any point you're feeling that you just want to have a little chat, you want a friendly listening ear, do please go and speak to one of them. At lunchtime and after the workshop sessions, the tent will be open and available as a space for quiet reflection. And the other thing I'd say is just don't underestimate the power of your voice in the room today. Whatever you voice, whether you voice it in the plenary, whether you voice it in a workshop, whether you voice it in a private one-to-one conversation, or you voice it by writing something in your journal, what you have voiced has been voiced in this room and registered in the atmosphere somewhere. So this event is a part of a bigger program of events at St Ethelburga's, looking at faith and moral courage and what it really means to live those qualities in an age of polycrisis. At St Ethelburga's, we do believe that at the root of our civilizational crisis is a spiritual crisis or a crisis of deep meaning, and that for everyone, there is this question, how am I called to live my values in this time? And as a part of the series, we've been surveying people. Thank you to everyone who filled in a survey that Harriet sent out in the email before this event. We've been surveying people on their own reflections on faith and moral courage and how those things relate. And there's one really striking finding in this survey. And it's the question where people are given a range of different options and asked what takes the most courage. And they're given options like to live, the call of my conscience, to take risks, to live my personal values, to risk personal reputation, and so on. And what I found really striking is that the thing that people say takes them the most courage is to face the truth of the multiple crises that humanity faces now. So if you look on the graph, to live the call of my conscience is here, to put my values into action is here, to face the truth is here. Which I think is really interesting. And on that theme, there's just one more story from the St. Ethelburga's perspective that I'd like to tell you, and it's the story of Ethelburga herself. And this is the story as it's recorded in the ecclesiastical history of English people by the Venerable Bede. So Ethelburga was a 7th century nun. She was an unusually powerful leader of her time. She was the first abbess of Barking Abbey, and she led a monastic community that included both women and men. And when the plague came to Barking Abbey, it took hold in the men's precinct first. And this was at a time when the plague could kill up to half the population of any town in Europe. So the men were sick and dying fast. And Ethelburga gathered her nuns together and she asked them, "Where do you want to be buried?" And the nuns could not answer her. The next day she gathers them together and she asks them, "Where do you want to be buried?" And her nuns cannot answer her. She keeps asking them the question and they refuse to answer until one night they're coming out of the chapel singing after matins. And I looked it up because I was curious. And the hymn they were most likely to have been singing was the Te Deum, which is a hymn written in the 2nd century, which begins, "We praise thee, O God, we acknowledge thee to be the Lord. All the earth doth worship thee, the Father everlasting. To thee all angels cry aloud, the heavens and all the powers therein. To thee cherubim and seraphim continually to cry." It's a very beautiful hymn where they're naming all of the different levels of reality. The earth realm, the human realm, the angelic realm, the seraphic realm, which form part of the medieval cosmology, very different from our own. And as they're coming out into the night singing, they see a light in the sky, which is said to be brighter than the light at noonday. And they're transfixed. And the light begins to travel around the monastery grounds until finally it comes to settle on a certain place in the earth. And then they all understand that this is the answer to Ethelburga's question. This is where they are to be buried. It's kind of a grim story. It's not an easy story, but I really love this story. I love this story because despite all of the fantastical Gothic elements to it, it's actually, I find it quite plausible, and I find it very human, how the nuns can't answer her question. I also really love that there's actually a sequel to this story, which is after Ethelburga and the nuns died and her successor arrives on the scene. She says, "Oh, why was this grave put here?" And you sort of get sense that perhaps it's been put in quite an awkward place that doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe it's been put in the vegetable plot or in some doorway, you know. And one of the young novices says to her, "Oh, well, there was this light in the sky and God told us to put it there." And I sort of feel like this story has a little bit of something for everyone, for believers and skeptics alike. And I also really love this story because they're singing. And no matter what they're going through, they're still singing. I think that poets down the ages have warned us of the dangers of trying to approach truth without beauty. And that's why I am so delighted that we are opening our conference today by hearing from two wonderful artists. First, Sam Lee, who will be singing, and David Hinton, a poet.